I was sitting at the head table of my only child's wedding reception, wearing my best navy dress, watching my new daughter-in-law laugh with her German friends. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the elegant Toronto venue, and everything should have been perfect. But then I heard it. I leaned forward as Ingrid, my new daughter-in-law, whispered something in German to her friends while looking directly at me. The words cut through the celebration like a knife. "Look at that pathetic old woman trying so hard to fit in. She's nothing but a burden now." The German friends giggled behind their champagne glasses. What Ingrid didn't know was that I had been fluent in German since childhood, thanks to my beloved grandmother. Without missing a beat, I looked Ingrid straight in the eyes and replied in perfect German, "I understand every word you just said, and I've understood every cruel comment you've made about me for the past 2 years." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael, my son, stared in shock. The German friends went pale. Ingrid's face turned from smug satisfaction to absolute horror. But what happened next would tear my family apart forever, revealing just how deep betrayal can cut when it comes from the people we love most. Before continuing, if this story is touching your heart, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Don't forget to ring the notification bell, because every day I'm bringing you stories of women who turn their deepest pain into a new good way of living their lives. To understand the depth of that moment, you need to know my story. The story of a woman who gave everything for her family, only to watch it crumble in the most unexpected way. 27 years ago, when Michael was just 5 years old, I became a widow. My husband died in a construction accident, leaving me with a mortgage, a kindergartner, and exactly $300 in our checking account. I could have given up. I could have moved back in with my parents or relied on government assistance. But I didn't. Instead, I took on 3 jobs. Mornings at a bakery starting at 4 a.m., afternoons cleaning offices, and evenings waitressing at a local diner. My hands were always cracked from the cleaning chemicals, my feet always aching from standing for 16 hours a day. Every night, I'd come home to find little Michael waiting by the window, his homework spread across the kitchen table. I'd heat up whatever dinner I'd managed to prepare before my morning shift, and we'd sit together while I helped him with math problems, my eyes burning with exhaustion. The other mothers at school functions arrived in nice cars wearing designer clothes. I showed up in my waitress uniform, smelling faintly of coffee and dish soap, but I showed up. Every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every soccer game, I was there. When Michael was 12 and needed new soccer cleats, I worked extra shifts for 2 weeks straight. When he wanted to join the debate team but we couldn't afford the competition fees, I sold my mother's wedding ring, the only valuable thing I owned. I never complained, not once. My greatest joy was watching Michael excel in school. He was brilliant, just like his father had been. When he graduated high school with a full scholarship to University of Toronto, I cried for 3 hours straight, not from sadness, but from pure pride and relief. During his university years, I'd send him care packages filled with homemade cookies and $20 bills I could barely afford. I'd call every Sunday evening, always asking about his studies, his friends, his dreams. He was everything to me, my purpose, my legacy, my heart walking around outside my body. Then, 2 years ago, Michael called with news that changed everything. "Mom, I've met someone. She's incredible. I think she might be the one." Ingrid was from Munich, in Canada, on a work visa for her marketing job. She was beautiful, educated, sophisticated, everything I had dreamed my son would find. When Michael brought her home for the first time, I had prepared for weeks. I'd researched German customs, learned to make sauerbraten and Apfelstrudel from YouTube videos. I'd bought German beer and set the table with my grandmother's best china. The same grandmother who had taught me German as a child through bedtime stories and afternoon conversations. Ingrid seemed charmed by my effort. She complimented the food, admired the small house that I had finally paid off after 22 years of sacrifice, and laughed at my attempts to pronounce German phrases. "You're so sweet to try," Ingrid had said, patting my hand condescendingly. "Your German is, how do you say, adorable?" I had smiled, not mentioning that my German was actually flawless. My grandmother had been born in Berlin and had insisted on maintaining the language, even in our English-speaking household. Those childhood afternoons, spent learning proper grammar and pronunciation, had been some of my most treasured memories. But something told me to keep that skill to myself. Over the next 2 years, as Michael and Ingrid's relationship deepened, I welcomed my future daughter-in-law with open arms. I included her in family traditions, sent her birthday cards, and even helped her navigate Canadian bureaucracy for her permanent residency application. When they announced their engagement, I was thrilled. Finally, Michael would have the family I'd always wanted to give him but couldn't provide alone. I insisted on contributing to the wedding expenses, despite my limited savings. It's what his father would have wanted, I told Michael, writing a check that represented months of careful budgeting. I helped with wedding planning, attended dress fittings, and even learned German wedding traditions to make Ingrid feel honored. I researched everything, from the proper way to present the wedding gift to the customary foods that should be served. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was planning a wedding steeped in German traditions, while Ingrid remained completely unaware that I spoke the language fluently. During those 2 years of preparation, I began noticing small things. How Ingrid's smile would fade when Michael left the room, how she'd check her phone constantly during family dinners, how she'd make little comments about the neighborhood, the house, the quaint way Michael had been raised. But whenever Michael was present, Ingrid transformed into the perfect girlfriend, attentive, loving, respectful. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my protective instincts were simply overactive because Michael was my only child. I'd waited so long for him to find love. Surely I was just having normal mother-of-the-groom anxieties. The wedding day arrived like a dream I'd been waiting years to see. Watching Michael in his tuxedo, handsome and confident, I felt every sacrifice had been worth it. Every double shift, every missed meal, every moment of bone-deep exhaustion, it all led to this moment of pure joy. I'd chosen my navy dress carefully, had my hair styled at a salon for the first time in years, and even bought new shoes despite the expense. I wanted to look worthy of standing beside my successful son and his beautiful bride. As I took my seat at the head table, surrounded by Ingrid's family and friends who'd flown in from Germany, I felt proud. I'd raised a man who could attract such a worldly, educated woman. I'd done my job as a mother. But as the evening wore on and the champagne flowed, I began hearing conversations in German around me. Fragments at first, then longer exchanges between Ingrid and her friends, and every word cut deeper than the last. I heard her tell her friend Petra that my house was wie ein Museum, like a museum, full of old, worthless things that reminded her of poverty. She laughed about how I still used coupons at the grocery store and how embarrassing it was when I'd offer to split restaurant bills. During the father-daughter dance, when I was wiping away tears of joy, she whispered to her cousin that watching me cry was peinlich, embarrassing. She said I was being overly emotional and dramatic, just like alte Frauen, old women, always were. But the worst came during dinner, right before the moment when everything changed forever. As I was adjusting my napkin and smiling at the beautiful evening I'd helped create, Ingrid leaned over to her friends and delivered the words that would end my silence forever. Those words about me being pathetic, about being a burden, about trying too hard to fit in. They weren't just cruel observations. They were the culmination of 2 years of hidden contempt, finally spoken aloud because she thought she was safe in her linguistic bubble. She had no idea that every word was being understood by the woman she was mocking, the woman who had welcomed her, supported her, and helped pay for the very wedding where she was being humiliated. That's when I decided I'd heard enough. The moment Ingrid realized that I understood German, something shifted in the air. It was like watching a mask slip off someone's face in slow motion. You speak German?" Ingrid stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I set down my champagne glass with steady hands, though my heart was racing. "Fließend," I replied in perfect German. Fluently. The color drained from Ingrid's face. Her German friends exchanged panicked glances, suddenly understanding that every conversation they'd had that evening, every cruel comment, every mocking observation had been perfectly understood. Michael looked between me and his new wife, confusion written across his face. "What's going on? What did you say to her, Ingrid?" Before Ingrid could respond, I continued speaking, still in German, my voice calm but firm. "For 2 years I've listened to you call me die alte Schachtel, the old hag. I've heard you tell your friends that I'm pinish, embarrassing. Tonight, you called me pathetic and said I was nothing but a burden. Eleanor, Michael's aunt, who was sitting nearby, leaned forward. She'd been watching the exchange with growing concern. What is she saying? Someone needs to translate what's happening here. I turned to Eleanor, switching back to English. She's been insulting me in German for 2 years, thinking I couldn't understand. Just now she told her friends I was a pathetic old woman trying too hard to fit in, and that I was nothing but a burden. The gasp from Eleanor was audible even over the wedding reception's background music. Other family members at nearby tables began turning to look, sensing the tension. I didn't, Ingrid started, but her voice trailed off as she realized there was no way to deny what she'd said. Michael finally spoke up, his voice tight with confusion and growing anger. Mom, are you sure you understood correctly? Your German isn't… maybe you misheard. The words hit me like a physical blow. My own son was questioning me, defending the woman who had just publicly humiliated me. Mein Deutsch ist perfekt, Michael, I said quietly in German, then repeated in English for everyone to hear. My German is perfect. My grandmother was born in Berlin. She taught me from the time I was 3 years old. I've understood every word your wife has said about me since the day you brought her home. I turned back to Ingrid, who was now visibly trembling. Do you remember last Christmas, when you thought I was in the kitchen? You told Michael's cousin that you couldn't wait until I was too old to live alone so you could put me in ein billiges Altersheim, a cheap nursing home. You said it would be such a relief when I was no longer your problem. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. She said that? At Christmas? The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Other family members who had witnessed Ingrid's sweet, caring facade were beginning to understand the scope of the deception. I wasn't finished. 2 years of suppressed hurt and betrayal came pouring out. Do you remember Michael's birthday last year? When I spent 3 days making his favorite cake from scratch because I knew it would make him happy? You told your mother on the phone that it was wie ein Hund gemacht, like a dog made it. You laughed about how I was trying so hard to impress you with my amateur baking. Michael's face was pale now, the implications of what I was revealing beginning to sink in. And just last month, I continued, my voice growing stronger, when I offered to help with the wedding planning, you told your friend Greta that dealing with me was like babysitting einen senilen Großmutter, babysitting a senile grandmother. You said you couldn't wait until the wedding was over so you could start limiting my access to your new family. The German friends at the table looked mortified. One of them, a woman named Petra, actually stood up and walked away from the table, unable to face the shame of being part of this cruelty. Eleanor reached over and grabbed my hand. Honey, why didn't you say something before now? Why did you suffer through this alone? Before I could answer, Ingrid finally found her voice. But instead of apologizing, she went on the attack. You had no right to spy on my private conversations, she hissed, her accent thickening with anger. What kind of person pretends not to understand a language just to eavesdrop? The audacity of the statement left everyone stunned. She was actually trying to make herself the victim. Michael, incredibly, seemed to be buying it. Mom, that does seem kind of deceptive. Why wouldn't you tell us you spoke German? I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. My own son was taking his wife's side, even after learning about years of cruel treatment. Deceptive? I repeated, disbelief coloring my voice. Michael, she called me a burden at your wedding reception. She spent 2 years planning to isolate me from my own family. And you think I'm the one being deceptive? But Michael was looking at Ingrid with concern, not at me with understanding. 2 years of subtle manipulation had done their work perfectly. You're upset, Mom. You're probably misunderstanding the context, he started. The context? Eleanor interrupted, her voice rising with indignation. What context makes it okay to call your mother-in-law pathetic and a burden at her son's wedding? Other wedding guests were beginning to stare openly now. The photographer, sensing drama, had stopped taking pictures. The band played on, oblivious to the family destruction happening at the head table. Father Rodriguez, who had officiated the ceremony and was sitting at a nearby table, approached quietly. He'd known me for years, had watched me struggle to raise Michael alone, had blessed our small family through every hardship. What's happening here? He asked gently. Eleanor quickly explained the situation. Father Rodriguez's expression grew grave as he listened. He'd performed hundreds of weddings, and he'd seen his share of family drama. But this was different. This was a good woman being attacked by the very people she'd sacrificed everything to love. Ingrid, realizing she was losing control of the narrative, tried a different approach. Tears welled up in her eyes, perfectly timed, perfectly placed tears that would have fooled anyone who hadn't just witnessed her cruelty. "I'm sorry if my German was misunderstood," she said, her voice quavering. "Sometimes things sound harsher in translation. I never meant to hurt anyone." It was a masterful performance, but I had heard those same tears used before, usually when Ingrid wanted Michael to do something for her or buy her something expensive. "Misunderstood?" I repeated. "You looked directly at me and called me pathetic. You told your friends I was a burden. You've spent 2 years systematically undermining my relationship with my son, and now you want to claim it was a translation error?" But then something happened that I should have seen coming, but somehow didn't. Michael stood up from his chair and moved to comfort his crying wife, his arm around her shoulders, whispering reassurances in her ear. The same son who had never once comforted me through years of exhaustion and sacrifice was now protecting the woman who had publicly humiliated me. "Mom, you're being cruel," he said, his voice cold. "Can't you see how upset you've made her? This is supposed to be our wedding day, and you're turning it into some kind of interrogation." I stared at my son in complete disbelief. He was actually defending her. After everything I'd just revealed, after 2 years of hidden insults and planned isolation, he was worried about Ingrid's feelings. "I've made her upset?" I whispered. "Michael, she called me pathetic. She's been planning to put me in a nursing home. She's counting down the days until she can cut me out of your life completely." "Those are just words, Mom," Michael said dismissively. "People say things when they're frustrated, but what you did, pretending not to understand German, listening to private conversations, that's actually wrong. Before we continue, make sure to like this video and subscribe. With your support, we can keep bringing more stories from powerful women that touch the heart of all of us." The wedding reception continued around us, but at the head table, my family was quietly tearing apart. And I realized with crystalline clarity that I was completely alone in this fight. Father Rodriguez stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "Son, your mother has shown tremendous patience and grace. Perhaps you should listen to what she's trying to tell you." But Michael's attention was entirely focused on Ingrid's performance. 2 years of manipulation had trained him to prioritize her emotional needs above everything else, including his own mother's dignity. "I think my mom owes my wife an apology," Michael said finally, the words hitting me like a slap across the face. The revelation I'd hoped would bring justice had instead made me the villain in my own son's story. And as I looked around the table at the faces staring back at me, I realized that sometimes the truth isn't enough to overcome a perfectly executed lie. The wedding reception had become a battlefield, and I found myself standing alone while my son comforted the woman who had just publicly humiliated me. Father Rodriguez cleared his throat gently. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately, away from the other guests." But Ingrid, sensing an opportunity to control the narrative, shook her head while dabbing at her perfectly placed tears. "No, I think everyone should hear this. I've been accused of terrible things, and I deserve to defend myself." The manipulative brilliance of it took my breath away. She was turning this into a public trial where she could play the victim, the poor foreign bride being attacked by a jealous mother-in-law. Michael tightened his protective grip around his wife's shoulders. "Mom, I think you owe Ingrid an apology. This is supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, and you're ruining it with these accusations." Those words hit me like a physical blow. My son, the child I'd raised alone, worked 3 jobs to support, sacrificed everything for, was demanding I apologize to the woman who had called me pathetic and a burden. "An apology?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Michael, she insulted me at your wedding, in front of everyone. And you want me to apologize?" "You embarrassed her in front of her family and friends," Michael replied, his voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. "You've been secretly listening to her private conversations for years. That's really disturbing behavior, Mom." Eleanor stood up so quickly, her chair scraped against the floor. Michael James Thompson, how dare you speak to your mother that way? This woman raised you alone, worked herself to the bone for you, and this is how you repay her? Aunt Eleanor, please stay out of this, Michael said dismissively. This is between my mother and my wife. Your wife just called your mother pathetic. Eleanor's voice was rising, drawing more attention from nearby tables. She's been insulting her for 2 years. How is this even a discussion? But Michael's attention was entirely focused on Ingrid's tears. 2 years of subtle manipulation had trained him to prioritize his wife's emotional needs above everything else, including his own mother's dignity. Ingrid looked up at him with those perfectly watery blue eyes. I can't believe she's been spying on me all this time. It feels like such a violation of trust. The word choice was deliberate and devastating. Violation of trust. As if understanding a language was somehow an invasion of privacy rather than a skill, I felt something breaking inside my chest. Not my heart, that had shattered the moment Michael took Ingrid's side, but something deeper. My faith in the family I'd built, my belief in the values I'd taught my son, my trust that love would ultimately prevail over manipulation. Spying? I repeated, my voice growing stronger as anger began to replace heartbreak. I wasn't spying, Michael. I was listening to my daughter-in-law call me names in what she thought was a secret language. There's a difference. Father Rodriguez stepped forward, his usually gentle demeanor firm. Son, I've known your mother for 15 years. I watched her work multiple jobs to put you through school. I've seen her sacrifice her own needs for yours countless times. She deserves better than this. Michael's jaw tightened. Father, I appreciate your concern, but you don't understand the full situation. My mom has been difficult about my relationship with Ingrid from the beginning. Difficult how? Eleanor demanded. By welcoming her into the family? By learning to cook German food? By helping pay for this wedding? The mention of money made Ingrid shift uncomfortably. She knew exactly how much I had contributed to their wedding. Money that represented months of careful saving from a woman who lived on a modest pension. She's been overly involved, Michael continued, his loyalty to his wife overriding decades of love and sacrifice from his mother. Always trying to insert herself into our relationship. Ingrid needs space to feel comfortable in our family. I stared at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. This wasn't the boy who used to wait by the window for me to come home from work. This wasn't the teenager who'd hugged me tight when I'd cried over bills I couldn't pay. This was a man who'd been systematically turned against his own mother by a master manipulator. Space, I repeated quietly. Is that what you call it when she plans to put me in a cheap nursing home? When she counts down the days until she can limit my access to your family? Ingrid's tears stopped for just a moment, a barely perceptible pause that only someone watching closely would catch. But Father Rodriguez caught it, and so did Eleanor. I never said those exact words, Ingrid protested, but her voice lacked the conviction of true denial. You said them in German, I replied steadily. You said you couldn't wait until I was too old to live alone, so you could put me in ein billiges Altersheim, a cheap nursing home. You said it would be such a relief when I was no longer your problem. The precision of the German phrase, delivered with perfect pronunciation, made it impossible to deny. Several of the German wedding guests were now openly uncomfortable, recognizing the truth in my words. Michael looked confused, caught between his wife's tears and my detailed accusations. Even if you said something like that, Ingrid, you were probably just venting. Everyone says things they don't mean when they're frustrated. The rationalization was breathtaking. He was now openly admitting that his wife had said cruel things about me, but dismissing it as normal behavior. Eleanor had heard enough. Michael, listen to yourself. You're making excuses for someone who called your mother pathetic at your wedding. What has this woman done to you? She loves me, Michael snapped. She chose to be with me, to build a life with me. She didn't have to stay in Canada. She could have gone back to Germany. But she chose us. The manipulation was so complete, so thorough, that Michael actually believed he should be grateful that Ingrid had chosen him. As if her love was a gift he needed to earn, rather than something mutual and equal. I saw it all clearly now. Every conversation where Ingrid had subtly criticized me, every suggestion that Michael's childhood had been somehow lacking, every gentle redirection away from family traditions and toward more sophisticated alternatives. It had been a masterclass in psychological manipulation, and my son had been the perfect target. A man raised by a loving but tired single mother, hungry for approval and validation. "You're right, Michael," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "She did choose you, and I'm starting to understand why." I stood up slowly, my navy dress rustling against my chair. The entire head table was watching now, along with most of the reception guests. "She chose you because you're kind, generous, and loyal, qualities I spent 27 years teaching you. She chose you because you have a successful career, built on the education I worked 3 jobs to provide. She chose you because you have a trusting nature, because you were raised by someone who never gave you reason to doubt the people who claim to love you." My voice grew stronger with each word, carrying across the reception hall. "But mostly, she chose you because she knew that your mother had raised you to put family first, to protect the people you love, to sacrifice your own comfort for others. She saw those qualities and decided to redirect them toward herself and away from the woman who gave them to you." Michael's face was pale now, the truth of my words hitting somewhere deep despite years of conditioning. "She didn't choose you despite your relationship with me, Michael. She chose you because of it. Because she knew that a man raised with that much love would do anything to protect his wife, even if it meant abandoning his mother." The silence that followed was complete. Even the band had stopped playing, sensing the gravity of the moment. Ingrid's tears had dried completely now, her mask finally slipping to reveal the cold calculation underneath. "You're being dramatic. This is exactly why Michael needed space from you. You make everything about yourself." It was her final mistake, dropping the pretense of hurt innocence and revealing the contempt that had always been there. I looked around the reception hall one last time, at the decorations I'd helped choose, at the German traditions I'd researched and incorporated, at the family and friends I'd welcomed Ingrid into with open arms. Then I looked at my son, my only child, my greatest achievement, my heart walking around outside my body, and saw that he was lost to me. "You're right, Michael," I said quietly. "This is supposed to be the happiest day of your life, and I can see that having me here is preventing that from happening." I picked up my purse, my hands steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "I hope you'll be very happy together," I said, and meant it despite everything. "I hope you get exactly what you've chosen." And with that, I walked out of my son's wedding reception, leaving behind 27 years of unconditional love and stepping into a future I'd never imagined I'd have to face alone. Behind me, the whispers started immediately, but for the first time in 2 years, I didn't care what anyone thought about me. I had finally chosen myself. 3 weeks passed before Michael called. I had spent those weeks in a strange kind of peace. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't walking on eggshells, wondering what Ingrid might be saying about me behind closed doors. The silence from my son was painful, but it was honest, unlike the false harmony I'd been living with before. Eleanor had called every day, checking on me, bringing groceries and sharing updates from other family members. The wedding guests hadn't stayed quiet about what they'd witnessed. Word had spread through our community like ripples in a pond. "Honey, you should know," Eleanor said one afternoon over tea. "Ingrid's own cousin reached out to me. Apparently, this isn't the first time she's caused problems in a family. She did something similar with her ex-boyfriend in Germany, turned him against his parents, isolated him from his friends. When he finally saw through it, she moved to Canada." I wasn't surprised. Predators often had patterns. The call from Michael came on a Tuesday evening. His voice was different, smaller, uncertain, like the little boy he used to be when he'd made a mistake and knew he needed to confess. "Mom? Can we talk?" I agreed to meet him at our old coffee shop, the one where we used to go after his soccer games, where I'd helped him with homework while working on my laptop between shifts. He looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his wedding ring conspicuously absent from his finger. "She's gone," he said without preamble, sliding into the booth across from me. "Back to Germany. She left 2 days after the wedding." I waited. I'd learned the power of silence over the years. "Her visa application was denied," Michael continued, his voice hollow. "Turns out she lied about several things on the paperwork. Immigration called it fraudulent misrepresentation." He looked up at me for the first time since sitting down. She married me for the citizenship, didn't she? The question hung between us like a bridge he wasn't sure he wanted to cross. What do you think? I asked gently. Michael's laugh was bitter. I think I've been an idiot. I think I destroyed my relationship with the person who loved me most in the world for someone who was using me the entire time. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a letter, several pages of handwritten German text. I found this in her suitcase. She left it behind, probably by accident. I had it translated. His hands shook slightly as he held it. It's a letter to her sister, dated 6 months ago. She calls me ein nützlicher Idiot, a useful idiot. She says I'm easy to manipulate because I'm desperate to please everyone. My heart broke watching my son face the truth of his situation. She writes about you too, Michael continued, his voice barely above a whisper. She says you reminded her of her own grandmother, who used to call her out on her lies. She was afraid of you from the beginning because she could sense you saw through her act. That explained so much. The immediate hostility disguised as sweetness. The systematic campaign to turn Michael against me. But the worst part, Michael said, his voice cracking, is what she says about our future. She planned to divorce me the moment she got her permanent residency. She was already talking to immigration lawyers about how to maintain her status as a single person. The coffee shop around us buzzed with ordinary life. Students studying, couples sharing desserts, families enjoying evening treats. Normal people living honest lives, building real relationships based on genuine feelings. I'm sorry, Michael whispered, and the words carried the weight of 27 years of love and trust that had been shattered in a single evening. Mom, I'm so sorry. You tried to love her, tried to welcome her into our family, and I chose her over you. I actually chose someone who was using me over the person who sacrificed everything for me. I reached across the table and took my son's hand, the same hand I'd held crossing streets, teaching him to write, comforting him through childhood fears. She was very good at what she did, I said quietly. Professional manipulators know exactly how to find someone's weak spots and exploit them. But I should have known better, Michael insisted. You raised me better than that. You taught me about loyalty, about protecting family, and at the first test, I failed completely. We sat in silence for a while, processing 2 years of deception and its aftermath. The family's been talking, Michael said eventually. Eleanor, the cousins, even some of the wedding guests. They all said they tried to warn me, but I wouldn't listen. Father Rodriguez called me yesterday. He said watching me choose Ingrid over you was one of the saddest things he'd witnessed in 30 years of ministry. I absorbed this information without satisfaction. I'd been right, but being right felt hollow when the cost had been so high. I spoke to a therapist, Michael continued. She says what happened to me is called emotional manipulation and parental alienation. She says people like Ingrid study their targets, learn what they want to hear, then slowly reshape their reality. He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. Can you ever forgive me? Can we? Is there a way back from this? I studied my son's face, really looked at him for the first time in months. The arrogance was gone, the dismissive attitude erased. In its place was genuine remorse and the humility that came from facing difficult truths. Michael, I said gently, you're my son. I didn't raise you for 27 years to give up on you after one mistake, even a big one. Relief flooded his features, but I wasn't finished. But things have to be different now. I can't go back to being the mother who enables you to take my love for granted. I won't accept being treated as disposable ever again. He nodded eagerly. Anything. I'll do anything to earn your trust back. It's not about earning, I corrected. It's about remembering. Remembering that the people who love you don't disappear when times get difficult. Remembering that loyalty is a choice you make every day, not just when it's convenient. 6 months later, we were building something new. Not the old relationship where my love was assumed, but a mature bond between two adults who understood its value. Michael had learned to recognize manipulation tactics and had ended 2 friendships with people who showed similar red flags. I had learned to set boundaries and advocate for myself. The wedding photos were long gone, thrown away along with the expensive dress and painful memories. But in their place were new pictures, mother and son at coffee shops, family dinners where everyone felt valued, holidays built on honesty rather than performance. As I often tell Eleanor, I didn't lose a son at that wedding. I lost an illusion. What I gained back was much more valuable, a relationship built on mutual respect instead of one-sided sacrifice. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is showing them what real love looks like, even when it means walking away from the counterfeit version. If this story moved you, click on the next video that's appearing on the screen now. I'm sure you'll be surprised by this new emotional and heartbreaking story I have right here to tell you.